Om Tat Sat. My humble prostrations to the all-pervading Brahman, to my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayanandaji Maharaj, to sage Narada and all sages and saints, and to each of you divine soul watching today's satsang. So today we will be covering Sutra number 35 from the Narada Bhakti Sutras, the glory of Supreme Devotion, Chapter 2. Commentaries by my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayanandaji Maharaj, and narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So let's get started on Sutra number 35. It is a very important sutra, although each sutra is very important, but some sutras have more implication, more direct implication for sincere sadhakas, and this is one of those. And we will be covering this in two parts. So the same Sutra 35 will be covered today, and we will conclude it tomorrow. So let's get started on Sutra 35. It is Tata tu Vishayatyagat Sangatyagat cha. Again, Tata tu Vishayatyagat Sangatyagat cha. Meaning that supreme devotion or parabhakti is indeed attained by renouncing the objects of the senses as well as the mental contact with them through subconscious desires, or they are called vasanas. So an aspirant must adopt the ideal of simple living and high thinking. And this is why I'm saying this sutra is very profound, and it is for serious aspirants, because in this materialistic world it is very hard to adopt the ideal of simple living and high thinking. People are caught in the rat race of the world process, thereby trying to acquire more and more material possessions, but trading it for peace and happiness instead. So they have material objects, but what they lose is the serenity and the peace that comes. So this sutra, this whole Narada Bhakti Sutras, devotion, God realization, is just like any serious study, only much more, because in a human body only we have the capacity to attain self-realization and achieve the heights of devotion. So a serious aspirant must not accumulate objects beyond his need and should scrupulously follow the virtue of aparigraha. If you are following my videos and satsangs regularly, then I have covered this in detail in Patanjali Yoga, where sage Patanjali guides us of this quality called aparigraha, which means non-covetousness, and asteya, which means non-stealing or not acquiring objects of enjoyment through fraudulent method. So these are the yamas and niyamas that we had covered in great detail. So further, with the aid of satsanga or good association, he should avoid these objects that excite the senses and keep the mind distracted. So it's very important to understand this, that although we have given up the physical pleasures, but these things continue to agitate our mind, just like think of this flame here that is fairly stable and calm, but if the same flame is outside in the wind, it will flicker and it will be extinguished. So we have to understand that in order to keep this flame of bhakti alive, we need to also understand the deeper implications and therefore find peace and a secluded corner where we meditate and pray and do all those things. An aspirant, however, must understand that mental renunciation is more valuable than physical renunciation. That's why I say just leaving our homes and going to a forest or somewhere else thinking we will attain God realization quickly is not such a simple thing, because there also you are taking your mind, your senses, your intellect, your habits, resonates with you, and therefore you will create your own little world there of desires. So what's more important is to give them up from the mind itself. Attachments to objects exist in the mind and not in the body. See, that is the issue. Well, eyes, senses, eyes seeing, smelling, nose, touch, taste, all these are the senses that when we look at the objects of these senses, they get excited. And when they get excited, they go to the mind and the mind gets excited. So it's really the mind that we have to control also, in addition to the sense objects. So those who adopt a habit of simplicity and renunciation, but do not attempt to destroy the subtle impressions of sense enjoyment in their minds, will also not achieve any substantial progress on the spiritual path. And this is a very deep shloka. It's also in the Bhagavad Gita, which we will cover now. It is actually chapter 3, and it is shloka number 6. So it is on Karma Yoga, and it is shloka number 6. So let's cover that together. And it is कर्मेन्द्रियाणि संयम्य य आस्ते मनसा स्मरन् इंद्रियार्थान् विमूढात्मा मिथ्याचारः स उच्यते. So again, this is chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, shloka number 6. I'll read the Hindi, then I'll explain in English. जो मूढ़ बुद्धि मनुष्य समस्त इंद्रियों को हठ पूर्वक ऊपर से रोककर मन से उन इंद्रियों के विषय का चिंतन करता है, वह मिथ्याचारी अर्थात दंभी कहा जाता है. What that means is that hard to understand person, or mood means dull person, a dull-wit person. He who has controlled the external senses but keeps enjoying them internally in his mind, according to Lord Krishna, he is a hypocrite and he cannot succeed on this path. So therefore, the first step is to stop the sense organs from external agitation, but then also the internal agitation. And that's why this path takes a lot of patience and drive. That is the essence of Lord Krishna's explanation there. And then there's another shloka that we will also cover. He further states that when the personality is not fed with sense objects, the objects turn away from him, but their taste continues to linger in his mind. But even when this taste turns away from him, then Supreme Self is realized. So this is like a sequential process. It is but natural for the mind to miss the senses, which is we call the memory lane, the smriti, the thought. And so many times where we have some sweet memories, even 10-15 years later, we reminisce on them and we continue to enjoy the taste of that memory. That's what Lord Krishna is talking about here. So if you have some specific things like that and you want to sincerely walk on this path, then he says we have to understand that the mind has to give that up. And this is from chapter number 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, and it is shloka number 59. So chapter 2, shloka number 59 of the Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 2 is called Sankhya Yoga, or the knowledge of wisdom. The chapter on wisdom from Lord Krishna. So let us read the shloka. Lord Krishna says, Vishaya nivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasoapyasya param drishtva nivartate. इंद्रियों के द्वारा विषयों को ग्रहण न करने वाले पुरुष के भी केवल विषय तो निवृत्त हो जाते हैं, परंतु उसमें रहने वाली आसक्ति निवृत्त नहीं होती. इस स्थित प्रज्ञ पुरुष की तो आसक्ति भी परमात्मा का साक्षात्कार करके निवृत्त हो जाती है. So Lord is explaining a very profound concept here, that when our senses, we have stopped contact of the objects with the senses, then obviously the objects are gone, we are not consuming them externally, we are showing restraint. But Lord Krishna says, but the attachment that we have against those objects does not go away, because that's an internal thing. It's coming from within, and then it will continue to agitate us, and therefore at some point we will break our discipline and then go attack those senses again. And those who do dieting know that. How long can you hold your desires for your favorite dessert or favorite food, for example? And that is what Lord Krishna is saying, that the attachment has to be dealt with internally. It's an internal journey. But for those people who get closer and closer to God realization, and once they get self-realized through God's grace, all that contamination is gone, all those desires are gone, and you only feel the light of God, and therefore you are in a different dimension where these small petty things do not matter anymore. So that is the essence of this sutra also. So as I told you, this is going to be a very deep, as we go in the deeper waters, and if we are serious, then we should pay very careful attention to this satsanga. And Lord Krishna's words, sage Narad's words, and all the sages and saints who are saying the same thing, just using different words, different terminology. So this verse suggests that although an aspirant must turn away from the objects of senses, he must clearly understand that the physical withdrawal does not constitute perfect renunciation. So don't pat yourself too much on the back if you have succeeded externally, because we still have a long journey to cover in the internal recesses. So we must continue to strive to eradicate the subtle unconscious impressions of the pleasure of the senses, and that is what we call sadhana. So we must not stop our sadhana or bhakti till we attain self-realization. So continue going on and on and on, and the state in which these impressions are absolutely destroyed. So the minute we achieve that state called self-realization, God realization, nirvana, mukti, then at that point all the subtle impressions in our unconscious are as if destroyed, and at that point we will not be agitated externally or internally. So Yoga Vasishtha and other Vedantic works emphasize profoundly that it is not until the ego thought is renounced that one succeeds in renouncing the objects. So we will cover this in more detail tomorrow. So we can conclude this Sutra 36. As I told you, it is very profound, and if we adapt this process correctly, we will quickly advance on the path of our bhakti. This is Swami Nikhilananda. Om Tat Sat.